Today what we're going to be doing is going over the advanced construction visualization. And what I'm going to end up doing is looking at a couple of things. So one of which is going to be the importance of visualization, some of the benefits. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of the tools that are available, and then I'm going to go over some examples of how people are utilizing this, and go over some demonstrations of how we actually use the software to do that. So don't worry, I'm not going to kill you with PowerPoint the whole time. Now, in terms of the importance of visualization, Autodesk had a survey that went out a couple of years ago, and the respondents came back on that survey, and 90% of them said they were more likely to win competitive bids and, get community support for their projects with 3D visuals. And 50% of the people said that they save a lot of money, so for most people anyway, by creating those visualizations in-house as opposed to farming them out or having other people take care of that. Now, in terms of those benefits and the way things are going, a lot of people can't read 2D plans. So going to something like a board meeting or a town hall where you're trying to show a development that you're working on, or even in many cases people in the field or in the trades trying to explain to them what's happening with the piping that you expect them to lay out, understand what goes above or below everything with the different scales and the different line types. Having something in 3D makes it much easier to explore the constructability and understand what's actually supposed to go on. So some of the things that we're going to be looking at is how to coordinate site and workflow. We're going to be looking at how to simulate schedules or look at different logistics. Also taking into consideration, like the question I got earlier, changes, because you're not going to run this once and everything just stays on that during the project. So a lot of benefits. Most of it comes down to communication. So making sure that everybody's on the same page and understands the end goal. And from that, you can then plan and get buy-in much more easily. Now, the tools that we're going to be focusing on are a handful of tools from the Building Design Suite. Now, tools that are in this one are actually in several of the other suites. So if you're in the Infrastructure Suite, most of the tools are there as well. Now, within that suite, there are several tools that are very, very good for presentation. So you've got Revit, Navisworks, 3D Max, and InfraWorks. Now, of those, we're going to be focusing on the Revit and the Navisworks tools the most. So just because everybody has those, everybody's used to using them, hopefully, within construction at least. Max, while being an amazing tool for visualization and rendering and presentation, a lot of people in construction aren't already using it. And the thing that we're talking about today a little bit is sequencing. And the sequencing in there is not as user-friendly as it might be inside of Navisworks. Now, in terms of the tools that we have to play around with, there's the displacement tools that are available inside of Revit. And this is one of those things that they added a couple of years ago. It's a very easy-to-use tool, but because it's not, a very crazy tool, doesn't do weird forms, a lot of people didn't pay attention to it. They didn't realize that they could take objects and essentially break them up into smaller pieces. They didn't realize that they can actually pull things apart to better explain how the actual components work together or even fit together. So this is one of the ones we're actually going over, but this is in the regular version of Revit. So I can take any model that I actually have and essentially start pulling components off, whether it's just from a visibility standpoint or from trying to explain how these things fit together. So most people have always seen those exploded diagrams of maybe engines or components or parts. Essentially, I can do that with buildings. Now, in terms of trying to explain to people how things actually lay out, what we've seen with a lot of clients, and this is actually a project that we've worked on with the client, is using the visual references for layout and coordination. So that way they can understand how the sleeves are placed, where all the components are. And you can place call-outs, like you can see a few here, for these specific individual elements. So if you're actually numbering the components on site, whether it's for an RFID code, whether it's just writing on it, you actually know exactly where they're placed. And the same thing goes for just about any object. So you're laying things out. You're pre-coordinating the model when it's a virtual element, so that way you can actually make sure that once it arrives on site, your problems should either be minimal or non-existent if everything goes well. And here's an example of, again, same project that we were just looking at the other two slides for, where we actually went through everything in pre-coordination. They understood where it goes. They understood what it would go, what it would be placed like, and where it would be placed. And you can actually see the field installation matches almost exactly the pre-coordination model. So they were using the 3D visualizations to make sure that everybody on the site understood how things were going to be placed, where things like the hangars needed to go to actually ensure everything else had the space to be placed as well. So they're not just dropping in one thing and not worrying about everybody else. This is used for the coordination. Now, when we start looking at things like logistics, that's where we start getting away from the static images and looking more at the animations. So that could be something as simple as a little animation showing how the site is actually being worked, where you're actually going to be placing your components, and actually showcasing, okay, this is how we expect to actually bring things in. This is where we're going to have the trucks come in. This is where we're going to actually stack the trucks for the work. These are the portions of the site that we're going to focus on. This is the time. This is the location. This is where we're placing elements. And this is how we can actually create the layout that we want. A question just came up of what program this is. This one's actually Navisworks. And I'm actually going to show a little bit of how you can do this in a couple of minutes. So, but this is just utilizing the core functionality in Navisworks with the timeliner portion, which is in the version of Navisworks that comes in the premium suite. You don't need Navis Manage. You can use Navis Simulate for this. And you're just attaching different things to it. And I can have as much or as little information showing up on the left-hand side. Now, I'm not going to make it sound like this is very, very simple. It does take a good amount of effort to get it to be this animated. But it can also be as simple. I'm just going to fast forward a little bit here. You can actually see it lifting things up and swinging it around. This animation could also be as simple as something like this, where you're just moving a camera and you're showcasing how certain elements are going to actually be lifted up and created. So for some cases, you want to actually show this is how we're going to lay things out. And whether you're using that internally just to help explain things, or you're going to take it externally and actually showcase what your plans are to a governing agency. So in this case, if you have to lift the crane up in the city, you have to show, okay, well, the Department of Buildings, how you plan to do that safely, where you can actually close off the roads. When do you swing this over other buildings and other people? How are you planning on doing that? So this is a method of presenting and actually getting approval from different approval boards. So it's not just making a pretty picture for the pretty picture's sake. You're actually doing this for very specific reasons. And you can see the difference in the visual quality from the one before to something like this. It doesn't have to be, full-on rendered to actually get the point across and to have people understand what your intentions are.